about before?
Yes. Yeah, we are live right now, folks.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you might be. This is Love Bay Radio coming live from Toronto. And we do understand that we have people from all over the world, really, who are part of our listenership. And it's always exciting to actually know that there are people out there who do follow what we do. And this streamline would not be happening if you were not here. So we're glad you're here. And sometimes people call me Dr. FM. My name is Francis Mpindu. I'm going to be your host today. And I'm very, very delighted that our brother Theo, who has been working hard to ensure that things are up and running behind the scenes. There's a lot of stuff that happens, and not just the listenership, but making sure that this is put in place and people will be able to hear and people will be able to interact. And that's what this is about. It's about interacting with one another. We usually talk about the 3Ds. You dialogue to discover and to decide what the next steps would be. And so that's what we're here for. So StreamYard coming all the way from Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And this is your host, Dr. Francis Mpindu. And I'm delighted to be here. So we do have an exciting topic before us today about Africa. Africa, we spell Africa with a K because most of our African languages, they actually have the ka sound, not the ca sound. So of course, you know that Africa, that's not even a name that we gave ourselves. Some people gave it to us. So that's why here at Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, we put Africa with a K because we feel that that's something we own. We are Africans and people of African descent around the world. So, again, welcome if you're just joining us. And in a moment, we'll be looking at chats, questions. If you have anything on your mind, feel free to send that to us. And of course, like I said, we're very, very grateful that our brother Theo is here, making sure that things are up and running. We do have quite a number of uh, co-hosts on this program, but this weekend is one of those that uh, many of them, if not all of them, except the two of us here today, uh, have other things that they're responding to. And we certainly miss them. We have our brother JD, all the way in Accra, who is a faithful supporter and contributor to this program, who is not able to be with us. And of course, we have our sister, Madame Chirinda, who is not with us. She usually streams all the way from Milwaukee in the USA. And of course, our host, Dr. Diallo, who usually streams all the way from Toronto. He is not with us as well. So all of them, they are responding to other matters in their lives. Life gets busy sometimes. But here we are, live. We're talking about resources in Africa. How do we utilize our resources? We have so many natural resources in Africa. How do we utilize them so that we use them to our benefit? Before we actually get into that, and like I said, feel free to send questions, comments. We'll be looking into that and ensuring that this uh, platform has that capacity to have us interact. We wanted to start by looking at what's happening in our African continent. And right now, in particular, we're looking at what's happening in Sudan. That situation has again escalated and things have exploded. And when you look at some of the things that have been happening since April 15th, which is just a few weeks ago, where attacks were made from one group to another, with all uh, the conflict between the two generals. One of the things you find is, and I was fascinated by this, it says that the issues in Sudan, there are at least four things that have been highlighted with regards to why this is happening. Number one, foreign involvement. There's involvement from foreigners. It could be foreign countries, neighboring countries, or outside countries from other parts of the world. And then we have ethnic tensions, people not getting along. And then we have religious disputes. And last but not least, which really ties in with what we're talking about today, is competition over resources. And I was like, aha, that's right. Competition over resources is contributing a great deal to the conflict that is happening in Sudan. So here we are. I do understand that each one of us, when we hear this and we come to the table, we do come with our own ideas. We do have some thoughts, we do have some feelings. And so we want to share that with each other today. Like I said, we talk about the 3Ds, we dialogue to discover so that we decide what the next steps would be. So, my brother Theo, what comes to your mind as you think about what is happening in Sudan? I know that you being an African as I am, we do have invested interest in what happens in the continent. And oftentimes, as our brother Professor PLO Lumumba says, sometimes we have people with ideas, they don't have authority or power. And then you have people with power, and sometimes they don't have ideas. So, what comes to your mind when you think about what is happening in Sudan right now, as we think about Africa taking control of its own resources? So something obviously is happening, and we're realizing that they are not entirely responsible for what's happening there. There's so many other contributing factors. So give us your thoughts on that, sir.
Thank you, Dr. FM. Thank you for hosting the program today. And I'm so grateful that we are going to be, considering discussing issues of great or greater or the greatest importance or relevance to Africa. We love our continent, and sometimes if we come to sit back, things go great, and other times it doesn't. Well, we're looking at Sudan. I thought things were great where it mattered, because if we talk in terms of the skirmishes around the borders between Rwanda and the DRC, it was resolved amicably. We may agree to disagree with so many different fronts. Even in our family structure, even if we look at our fingers, they are not the same, but they come from the hand. But if we come to look at the Sudanese situations, for instance, Sudan has been in the crosshairs of Western powers and others. And suffice to say that, right off the bat, I would say, before we even go into further details about what is happening, I would say the two gentlemen, the two generals will have to be arrested and prosecuted for their selfish interests. You see, we no longer live in those wide west kind of syndrome where you can just go get some people around and go shoot your way around and go. You're talking in terms of millions of people who have been displaced, their own country, no matter what it is. We have to speak truth to power. We have been tiptoeing around certain issues that has brought us to this. These two gentlemen, the two generals, so to speak, I don't know how they got their generalship, I don't know. They should be arrested if this thing calms down. Because these two people cannot put their interests, political, social, tribal, what have you, ahead of the people of the Sudan. They deserve better. They thought one government wasn't good, that government stepped aside. However, now we're looking at those who came to succeed. And now, can't they sit back and think about the people of the Sudan instead of them taking or picking up arms to fight among themselves, destroying the country? Already, post-pandemic, a lot of countries are reeling with respect to their economies. If you destroy, you are an African country, how are you going to be able to rebuild? Already, African countries are so indebted to foreign institutions. Destroying the country to go and rebuild it is like throwing up or vomiting, so to speak. If you're eating, please forgive me. I'm going to eat it. It wasn't supposed to be this way. No matter what their differences were, it shouldn't have gotten to this point where people are leaving the country in droves. 4 months ago, 5 months ago, 6 months ago, demonstrations were tolerated. Of course, it is the right of the Sudanese people to demonstrate and to feel that the government belongs to them. But there are some people, I was listening just before we came on air, I'm sorry, I was listening to a speech by PLO. And he said, this man is full of wisdom. There are some African leaders who go out there to be ridiculed. They feel they have to sell their countries to be able to stay in power. That is what PLO was saying, and it's true. If it is about resources that other Western countries are looking for, because the Sudan has got oil, it's got gold, it's got so many mineral resources. If they want it, hey, sit at the table, discuss. But you know what? Sudan has been in the midst of something that is going on with respect to, even when it comes to the Ethiopian Renaissance Dam thing between Ethiopia, Egypt, and Sudan. Something was amiss there. They were being used. But then no matter what or however you take it, I will come back to the same premise that these two gentlemen may have to be arrested, to be tried by an African court. I don't believe the International Criminal Court. It doesn't exist for me because we are not part of it. Africans or Sudanese will have to take up that mantle, that braveness to prosecute them. Africa should not tolerate any sort of, I was going to use a word, but I'll hold on to it. We shouldn't tolerate such things. Today, These same people, these same Sudanese people who are being ejected or who are fleeing for their dear lives, are being shunned by the West. I think we will come to that. There was a British, if the journalists are listening, there was a British, I think the Home Secretary, a person of color too, who was on BBC the other time saying that when somebody was asking, a reporter was asking her about how people are fleeing Sudan because of this turmoil, she said the Ukrainian situation is different from that of Sudan. Well, I'm sorry, madam. You caused the problem for the people to get away from their countries. In the case of this Ukraine, plane loads from the West went and evacuated so many people, millions of people from the Ukraine. But when it came to the Sudan, it said the Sudanese thing is not as important as that of the Ukraine. So they should tell the generals or those people who are pushing this narrative to think about it again, because you are not valued. You are not valued. So if you have to sit down and then express yourself, you may agree to disagree as to the cause of the country, but you are not this. You are not the only people. You are not the only two people who are Sudanese. The general population of Sudan have got a stake in how the country should be run. Not the two of them. It's so sad that we have to go this way again. I thought Africa was quiet right now. I thought everything was going great. We have been able to sort of start talking to each other. But whether it was resources, whether it's tribal, whether it is what it is, political interest, it shouldn't have come this way. It's so sad. And I'm so angry that these two generals, for all you know, their families are not in the Sudan. So we have to think about it again. Africa should not tolerate such nonsense any longer, where parochial interest supersedes that of the nation. So, Doc, I'm getting angry a little bit, so I will leave it at this particular point. And at the appropriate time, I think I would have calmed down to continue with the conversation.
Brother Theo, you're absolutely right. And thank you so much for being that articulate. I can tell that you are passionate about African matters because for us, you and I have often said this, we were not born in Africa, but Africa was born in us. And so we agree with our founder, Pan-Africanist, Dr. Nkrumah, that there is more to who we are than what the world sometimes see. You have pointed out very good points, and to your point about the two generals and just saying, you know what, I think something needs to happen to them, and I think this is where sometimes our leadership structures and our organizational structures do not really allow us to function the way we should because they have been couched in forms that prohibit us from actually moving forward. To your point, yes, something should happen to these two generals, but who would be able to do that? Um, I do agree that there has to be a sense of responsibility put on them in terms of what is happening there. I liked what you said about selfish interests, because when you look at it, sometimes you wonder whether is it just because of our ego that we like to stay in these positions so that I make a statement to other people that this is who I am, or do we really have the interests of the people at heart? And I think To your point, uh, there's an utter display of selfishness, which seems to take away from what should benefit the country and not just what should benefit me, myself, and I. As you pointed out, I don't think that their family members would still be in Sudan. Most likely they are somewhere else. And that is not right. And we see this repeatedly with many of our African leaders, where they send their children to go and study somewhere else. They have mansions and other accommodation arrangements made in other parts of the world because they don't even trust their own systems. They don't even trust their own educational systems, their own health systems, or institutions. So something needs to happen, and I agree with you that people should have the freedom to demonstrate. I liked some of the um, expressions coming out of Zambia with our brother Hichilema.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
he's saying people have the right to demonstrate. You don't need to be locked up. You don't need to be picked up and thrown in jail for saying something against the president. I mean, of course, we need to be embracing our cultural values. There is a respectful way of correcting an elder or someone in high office. There are respectable ways, and of course, that could be subject to different interpretations what that respect is. But I think what he has been saying is allow other people to stand up and challenge you, be it in parliament, be it in real life. It's okay to be challenged. It gives you an opportunity to explain yourself, to express yourself in ways that the people who voted you in can actually see that this is what your position is. Now, having said that, when you think of demonstrations being squashed, you begin to wonder whether uh, people feel that they are being heard. By the way, demonstrators, when people demonstrate, it simply means that they feel that they're not being heard. So this becomes an opportunity for them to stand up and say something by either marching or making noise in the streets. I mean, there are other expressions of demonstrations which sometimes leave a lot to be desired. When people start destroying things, the very things that the next day after the place is picked up, you want to go into the stores to buy things, or you want this, you want the traffic lights to be operating. We should not take our freedom to such an extent that we actually destroying our own things, because then that becomes a matter of the stewardship as well. So again, here we are, Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, coming all the way from the city of Toronto, and this is your host, Dr. Francis Mpindu, or as they call me sometimes, Dr. FM, with our co-host here, our brother Theo, who is ensuring that things are working in the background. Brother Theo, I don't know if we have any comments, any questions coming through, but as we get through, I was checking through here, I haven't seen anything yet, but if we do, please feel free to pass them on and either read the comment or ask the question, and we will continue to take it from there. One of the things that you mentioned, my brother, and I really feel that we need to put our house in order as Africans and people of African descent, we need to learn to appreciate differences. Now, appreciating differences doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with your position. I may disagree with you, and rightly so, because, I mean, let's look at it. Differences come because we have different upbringing, we have different information, we have different analytical skills, we have different interpretive skills. So all these contribute to our differences, and obviously we arrive at different conclusions. So if we do not appreciate our differences and we see our differences as points of contentions, usually because when we lack the skills to get along, then we will resort to violence. I need to outdo you. I need to get rid of you so that I remain as the only option, which is entirely wrong. You know, imagine if you were the only person in the world, it'll be very boring. You know, if you're the only person in the city, it'll be very boring. I mean, like, yeah, what can you do? So we have other people around us to make life exciting, make us realize that people think differently, people act differently, people conclude differently. And so I really think that part of this whole thing that's happening in Sudan right now is also, um, I guess, instigated by the fact that people are not appreciating their differences. Now, given the fact that both of them are generals, I know that when it comes to the resolving conflicts, your own interests and fears and concerns are just as important as the interests, concerns, and fears of the other person or the other party. And if your own fears, concerns, interests are not being addressed, you find it very, very difficult to consider the fears and options and the concerns of the other party. So if the generals would be put in a place where they can actually say, listen, let's talk about our fears, our concerns, our interests here. And I think, Brother Theo, one of the things I find is that sometimes we bring in people with good intentions to try to resolve issues, but those people are not skilled to facilitate the dialogues. See, a dialogue is designed to make people discover things about each other and about what is at stake. But oftentimes, some of those dialogues become shouting matches where people are yelling at each other. You know, you did this, you did that. And I mean, that does not take us anywhere. So, to your point, yes, something needs to happen, something must be done with and to these generals. But I wonder how much effort has been put to bring in skilled people. I know there are times when some of these, in some of these circles, where people have brought in uh, foreigners who do not fully understand the situation, but they think that they're credible because they're foreigners. Not necessarily. So we really need to be uh, self-analytical and look at our own situation and say, what do we have in our own nation? Most of us as Africans, we respect elders. Who are some of the elders in this nation? Who are some of the elders across Africa who could be brought in, who are skilled? Because you could be an elder who's not skilled. So let's face it, just because you're older doesn't necessarily mean that you have the capacity to resolve issues. So I don't know, Brother Theo, what comes to your mind when you think about who could be some of these potential facilitators? Yes, I agree with you. We need to pick these, we need to pick up these two generals and do something about it. But I'm not too sure before we pick them up, is there something else we could do in terms of getting them to talk?
Yes. Referring to you as a conflict, an expert in conflict management and stuff like that. The question that I will ask is, how about the African Union? You know my stance on the African Union. Um, they failed us a lot of times. They see things coming, they don't look hard on them to have a resolution to that. I was just reading this morning that these two generals have sent envoys to Saudi Arabia to help resolve this conflict. To Saudi Arabia. That's great. I think the Saudis are doing, they may do their part. But the question is, why Saudi Arabia? You see, there are so many unseen hands, actors behind the scenes. But this is what sometimes I get so riled up. That you know the pen that you're holding belongs to you. You are the power behind it. Everything that goes in to make it your own, why would you sort of sell? You know that, not that you don't know, you know that from time immemorial, Africa has been exploited and continues to be. And I'm so happy to say that, you know what, there's a new breed of young African leaders coming up. And they are the people who are going to change the system. Whether the outside actors like it or not. Of course, we are not going to live in a vacuum. You need to trade on an equal sort of basis. But then, if the two generals, I'm not writing off the African Union right now. Forgive me for saying what I said before. They've tried. They tried during the initial skirmishes. They tried to sort of bring the conflict to a control. That doesn't mean that they should give up. To such an extent that the people felt helpless. So far, the African Union hasn't been aggressive enough. I don't know, maybe they may be doing that. The media is not catching it. You know, we are in the media, but we've been following what's going on. The Saudis are trying their best, but this is an African problem that has got to be solved by Africans. The African is capable of making mistakes and solving them. This is what Dr. Nkrumah told us. And it's still true. We can make our own mistakes. Of course, the two generals may have made mistakes. But it behoves on us, the African Union, to be bold enough. The African leaders, a whole lot of them, they are sitting down in their palaces, and when it's time for the African Union presidential meetings, and they go there, and, you know, photo ops and drink coffee, tea, and what have you, and go back. Big English, big French, and stuff like that. But this is something that is destroying Africa and Africans. If you approach one Sudanese from Sudan and goes to say Chad, a lot of them have moved to Chad. It's a different situation right there. Cultures may be similar, but they are different. They have to go from point A to study the local languages, the local diet. It's a lot of problems. Women with children, older people, young men and women. You see, the country is going to be, a lot of young people are going to be lost to the country. People who would be able, at some point in time, help develop the country. They are all going to leave. Because after all this, the economic situation is not going to be easy. It's going to be very bad. Prior to this, the economy was bad because there was no functioning, a real functioning government there, because there was demonstrations left, right, and center, and all these kind of stuff. And one faction wanted a return to civilian rule. The military wanted to be a part of it, and all these. There were so much problems. But then, right after these skirmishes, which is degenerating into tribal, political affiliations, and all those kind of stuff, what's going on? There has to be an African solution to this. And what is the AU doing? They have to be more aggressive. We don't always have to leave Africa on, on the whims of another country, inviting all African presidents, and they just jet off and then go and sit down, talk their big English, and they come back, same problems. Africans will have to engage. We have to look at who we are as a people. The continent, let me go back up and say 20, 30 years ago. The conflict, civil wars all over the continent. But right now, things have died down. Why this? That's my question. Why this? If foreign actors because of your resources, you should know that. Put your feet down. In the case of Guinea, Mali, Chad, Chad, Central African Republic, Niger, these are young leaders. These are young leaders who know that their countries are dear to them. Enough is enough is enough. Our resources belong to us and the future generations. So if we sell out and the resources, the natural resources get depleted, what are we going to do? We have to be able to agree to disagree and steer our countries towards a course that will benefit our countries now and in the future. So these two generals, I will still say, after everything has gone down, may have to face some disciplinary action the African way. There's got to be a tribunal set up. I don't know whether the AU has got some judicial structures that can do this. I doubt it, because they are all in the same boat. Something has got to give. We love Africa. Africa is the continent of the future. It has been. Sometimes I sit back and say, I think God loves Africa so much. Gave us everything, but we have nothing right now. Tunisia was looking to help reorganize their economy. IMF came in. We want to impose ABCD on you, which was into the advantageous position of the Tunisians. They said, forget it, screw you. We have to look at other areas, because right now the world is moving towards a multipolar structure, if I can put it that way. We are not beholden to any one particular structure. There are so many organizations and structures springing up left, right, and center. So, in essence, what I'm saying is Africa belongs to us. We have to protect Mother Africa, because Mother Africa has suffered for far too long. And this shouldn't have happened. This shouldn't have gone this way. It shouldn't. It should not. I will leave that at this point, because the more I speak about it, the more I become emotional.
Which is understandable. Which is understandable, my brother Theo. You know what? These types of dialogues evoke all kinds of emotions within us, and rightly so, because when you and I are in Africa, we're not tourists. You know, we live there. That is our homeland, and so we look at things quite differently. You mentioned how come Sudan would send envoys to Saudi Arabia, and yet you have the African Union right there.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder, like, what what is going on? Why would they reach out to another power, another, you know, jurisdiction way outside of Africa when they are part of the African Union? And they should be. To your point, I think that has to do with the relationships. What kind of relationships have been established within the AU to actually support what is happening on the continent? Most of the time, I think AU can also become just a political arm of foreign impositors because we're not putting our house in order. Usually, that's what happens when a foreign power sees some gaps. They will capitalize on that situation and come in and take those gaps, fill those gaps, and then they feel more important. This is why you find that every now and again, we actually appeal to the West to come and resolve our issues. Well, they might have some skills, but ultimately, we ought to look at ourselves and say we have the capacity to heal ourselves. Most of the time, the colonial mindset is such that you have nothing, you don't know anything. We come in as your experts to help you to get somewhere and to be something. No, we're not defined by colonizers. We're not defined by somebody else. We have to define ourselves. To your point, we ought to be responsible for our own resources. But conflict is also stirred up by the fact that when you have limited resources, people fight over that. I remember as a little boy, growing up and living with my grandma up in the rural areas, where if it was lunchtime or supper time, we would all sit around. We would have two plates in the center, one for fufu, salsa, ugali, and then the other one with the meat, vegetables, and all the other stuff. And we would all dig in there, And in my context, I think we would have like 4 or 5 guys, seated. The women would eat on their own, and the men would eat on their own. And so when it was really interesting how we used to do it. If there was meat, if we had a dish that had meat in there, the older person would take the meat first. That would signal that okay, now we can all take our piece. If the older person in the group continues to just dig in with the sauce, with the sauce and the soup and all that, we would all be looking at each other and saying, when is he going to pick up the meat? Because we want the meat, right? And so and grandma was very skilled. She would put enough there for everybody, but sometimes she would put a few extra ones, and then you're like, okay, who's going to take those extra ones? I still remember my brother was very skilled, he would pick the vegetables, but he would use his last fingers, the last 2 fingers, like he would dig in and then pick the other stuff. And by the time you're like, somebody picked something, but you couldn't tell it was him until we discovered that he was very skilled. So when you have limited resources, people, can fight over that. Tension arise, which is a given. But imagine if somebody or the older person in the group then said, okay, guys, there's there are two extra pieces of meat and there are four of us. And they'll pick it up and just break it, so that each one would have equal share. Then there are no squabbles, you know. There won't be any need for me to give my brother the eye for picking the meat and knowing that that meat could have been shared with everybody. So I think that if we are in a place where the AU is actually able to say, or even within each country, okay, we have limited resources here, but let's share, so that we're not just feeding our own egos, right? Me, myself, and I, this is what I want, and I pick stuff as if nobody else, should have access to it. This is why I think your point earlier, when you mentioned selfish interest, really keeps coming back to me, because I realize that if there wasn't a selfish interest, you would say, how is this going to benefit our country? How is this going to benefit the city? How is this going to benefit the ordinary person on the street? But if we're not thinking along those lines, it's like, what can I amass for myself? Which does not help. It actually creates further issues. So,
we got somebody has just texted.
Excellent.
Yes, it's Thomas. Thomas in Baton Rouge in the United States. And Thomas says, elders always serve as mediators, counselors, and advisors in the African community. Why can't the elders on both sides work on this conflict that is killing women, children? The people are being displaced and slaughtered. Two generals with egos are destroying their country. That's from Thomas.
Thomas, well said, my brother. That is very, very important point. I think earlier on we were talking about the value of elders as Africans. By the way, one of the things I have discovered, like right now, I am working in Northern Ontario here in Canada with Indigenous people, the Musqueam First Nation. One of the things that I learned from the time that I got here was the tremendous respect that they have for elders.
Yes.
They look at the elders not just as older and mature, but they are the keepers of wisdom and knowledge. So, do you know, Brother Theo, that in First Nations culture, they don't talk about seniors. You never hear the word senior, as we would hear in Toronto and Vancouver and Harare and all. My seniors, I'm a seniors. They don't use that language. They say elders. As a result, there is no elder abuse in Indigenous peoples' communities. There's no abuse of elders, because they look at elders as knowledge keepers, peacemakers. Yeah, there could be verbal abuse, there could be violence against different people, but not with elders. So Thomas is right in saying we need to appeal to our elders. How come they cannot take elders from both sides and sit these gentlemen down? Sit these generals down and say, let's process this together. I think, to your point, the egos get in the way. I don't even want to listen to anybody. Like someone said, my mind is made up. Don't confuse me with the facts. So we need to come to that place, as Thomas said. Let's bring them into a conversation. Our elders are skilled. I tell you, they may not have sat in a postgraduate certificate program to learn, conflict resolution skills, but they are knowledgeable and they understand the resources, they understand the history, and they would be able to really help in the situation. So, Thomas, you're absolutely right, my brother. Um, the question then is, who are those elders? Can they be identified? Who would invite them? Or maybe the elders themselves, if they come together and agree and approach these generals, I would imagine that they would want to talk to them. I don't think they could say no to the elders. So that's a great point, Thomas. Well said, my brother. Well said. Brother Theo, what's your take on that?
Um, at the same time, too, if you look at within our African context, um, they may belong to different political backgrounds. You know, the former president has his own people, and there may be other factions out there within the African political system. When I'm in this party, and I would die for that party, no matter, even if they are doing something wrong, I would die for that party. I will not listen to anybody. Um, I would say it will be very difficult if at the point where people are being slaughtered, like Thomas said, if they cannot get their heads together and say that, you know what, we are elder states people. We know politics. Or we may not know politics. We have the traditional leaders out there.
Mm-hmm.
The country is going down the sink. What can we do? Because if we don't do anything about it, it's going to engulf us. We're all going to die. Because a lot of people were dying. I saw on TV the other time, I was virtually in tears. People, innocent people, dead bodies strewn all over Khartoum and Omdurman. And are these people not humans? And you see, when it comes to the elders coming together to do that, yes, they can, but do they have the will to do that? Because once they belong to different factions, I tell you, it's going to be very difficult. I know for a fact that, you know, once an election is over in Africa, they keep talking about the election for the 4 years. Unlike in the West, after a presidential candidate or a prime ministerial candidate has been declared the winner, everything stops. They go and govern and come back the next 4 years. In Africa, it's not the same. Elections continues. Whether the other person wins or not, the debate continues as if they are still, you know, running the campaigns, right? So there are so many vestige of, I mean, so many different parochial interests even within the population. But then we are moving away from this. This is a very serious problem that the elders who have to say, no, forget about it. We can help resolve this. But the question that I might ask again is, will these generals listen? Because they have gone to a point where it's a ceasefire. Yeah, ceasefire. Yeah, we are going to lay down our arms. Within the next 2 minutes, they start again. Another question is, are they in control of the forces? They may not be in control. Because now we're talking about outside influences out there too, because of the resources of the Sudan. The West and the East, nameless. Or sometimes we have to talk about it. The United States, Europe, and Russia, China, all these people, they all have their hands in there. And this is where the generals will have to sit back and say that after this, then what? Are we going to be treated like equals? The answer is no. The answer is no. I said I touched on the point where during the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis, plane loads, even after the Afghani situation crisis, after that, We saw planes, plane loads of people from Afghanistan being flown to the West for propaganda purposes. In the Ukraine, it's the same thing. Where I'll say it again, a person of color who is a minister in the UK said when she was asked about the UK or the EU, I mean, yeah, the European Union going to fly out a lot of the Sudanese, she said, well, the Ukrainian crisis is different from that of the Sudan. Now, of course, they are all human beings. Even if we look at the West here, how many Sudanese, in my own country here in Canada, the Minister of Immigration said, well, we are looking at it. We have flown over 300 and something people out of the Sudan and stuff like that. And we are going to make sure that people who have relatives and who have permanent residents can bring these people. No, Mr. Minister, no. There are a lot of people there too. They are humans. They are human beings. In the case of the Ukraine, nothing like that was happening.
That's right. You're absolutely right. It had nothing to do with do we have Canadian permanent residents there or
That's right.
citizens. They stepped in to rescue the situation. So you're absolutely right. That's a
Yes.
very good point. Where is the humanity?
Thank you. That was where I was heading to. Where is the humanity? So the generals will have to sit, not only the two generals there, African leaders will have to look at it that, look, when it comes to a certain point, you are an African, you are a black person, you don't belong here. You are only equal, or I can talk to you if I can get your resources, which is what we are witnessing now. So it saddens me when some of these people who we think they have the brain space to be able to make or take the right decisions where it comes to governance, they're not. They're not looking beyond what they can be looking at. Because the Ukraine thing and the Sudanese thing, so old ladies, women, children, elderly people, they don't know what to do. 2 months ago, they were in their homes. They were demonstrating. They said they want civilian rule. So, in the interest of the Sudanese people as a whole, the two people and the army cannot destroy the country. You cannot eat something, throw it up because you don't like it, and go back to eat it. After this, it's all said and done, there's going to be a problem, economic problem. Sudan has oil resources, gold, diamonds, what have you. It shouldn't have come this far. It shouldn't.
You're absolutely right, and I agree with you totally. It's really unfortunate. I think you mentioned something that I wanted to dwell on just briefly here about who is in control, who is in charge. We're talking about the resources within the continent of Africa. I mean, think of the natural resources in Sudan, as you have said. I mean, it's loaded with minerals that should be benefiting this nation, but those are the same minerals now people are fighting over. And yeah, it is a sad situation, really. It is a sad situation. Hey, you're joining us. If you're just joining us now, we're still here. Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio, all the way from the city of Toronto. And we're here talking about controlling our own resources in Africa. Who is in control? How can we? Because most of the time we are not in charge of our own resources. We have our own resources, but somebody is in control. And we're talking about how do we ensure that we stay on the right path and manage our own resources and use our own resources to further ourselves as a continent and also as different countries. So, my brother Theo, you were talking about uh, these two generals, and you asked the question earlier, would they listen to the elders? Would they listen to the elders? And that's a very, very important question to ask. Will they listen? Are they willing to listen? When you look at Sudan, my brother, their history, and I was actually really saddened by the fact that Sudan has had over or more than 15 military coups in their history.
How many?
15, more than 15 military coups.
Wow.
So when you think of what has been happening, there's a history there that we're dealing with. And the majority of that has really been due to military government. So when you have a military government, sometimes to switch from that to a place where, I mean, the military is important in any nation. Any nation, it is important to have a military, uh, you know, that is functional. But to have the military in charge of politics, to use the gun, to use warfare to threaten and to put things in place may not necessarily be the wisest thing to do always. But when you have done it for so long, you end up with a culture that's created that actually looks at military rule as the way to do it. But we have to shift. I mean, I know we have talked about, democracy. How does democracy look like in Africa? And that's a valid question, by the way. And I think that's something that we've talked about, and it'll be wonderful to bring some of our African leaders into this forum, onto this platform to talk about their views on democracy as far as Africa is concerned. I really believe that the way we define democracy in Africa should be different from the way the US and Canada and the UK and Russia and Sweden define democracy. We should be able to define our own, but when we have a system that's not functional, we leave ourselves open to all kinds of scrutiny and all kinds of dysfunctions that actually end up destroying us. Like you said earlier, we should be able to agree to disagree. But then when you look at the youth, I see that over 1 million people, no, it says over 2 million people have been displaced when it comes to Sudan. Over 2 million people have been displaced. And over 1.5 million people have been killed. And this is from previous. We're not even looking at what's happening now. So many lives are being lost. So again, the question is, when you look at how people define Africans and their connection to Africa based on what they want to benefit from Africa, I think that determines to what extent they want to get involved when we get into trouble and we need to be rescued. It was the same thing with Syria. I love Syrians. I love, Pakistans. I love everybody. But we cannot pick and choose when it comes to, Sudanese, it's different. I don't think we can go rescue anybody from there. I mean, that just is so upsetting. Like, what part of the global village do you come from? that you look at certain people and say, okay, these are worthy to be rescued, but these are not worthy to be rescued. One of the most humiliating comments I heard one time when I was in Uganda, this group of people I was working with were talking about conflict resolution. I was doing some training there on conflict resolution, alternative dispute and conflict resolution. They said, oh, by the way, because there was some people who were from the DRC who were part of that conversation. And they said, oh, it's interesting that, when people were killing each other in the DRC, what did Canada do? Did they send plane loads to come and pick us up? No, they didn't. And I was like, yeah, you're right. It's embarrassing. Why do you choose these people are worthy to be rescued and others are not? Are you supposed to be deciding stuff like that?
And you see, let's look at even, we are almost always welcoming as a people. Look at the situation in when the Afghans, when still started going awry in Afghanistan. Uganda and some other African countries said, yes, you can come. We took in some. But when it comes to us, I mean, we have to speak truth to power. It's not only the Sudanese situation. In the DRC Congo, they're under civil war. They're under war. So many women and children were killed, raped, maimed, and stuff like that. Right? Let's even go a little bit further. Haitians. The Haitian question has not been resolved yet. They were put in planes and sent back to Haiti. At the same time, Ukrainians were being sent to the United States, Canada, EU, and everywhere. Where is the humanity in us? So I go back to the generals. I don't know whether they watch TV. If they have consciences, they should know that, the same people that we are, throwing out of their own countries are going through hell. Nobody is coming to their aid.
Yeah.
Self-reliance. See you as a person, you are not valued. You know who you are. If somebody, the other person doesn't value you, screw that person. Don't care about them. History has taught us that, at some point in time, you've got to get up and say, enough is enough.
That's right. You need to stand up.
Stand up. Get up. Stand up for your rights. Peter Tosh said it. Mm-hmm. And everything that he said, he and Bob Marley, they were prophets. And it's true. And if you go into the history, and then if you read some of the books by Dr. Nkrumah, for instance, the Dawn Broadcast and the African Personality and all these kind of books, go on YouTube, read some of these books. What he said about 50 years ago is what is happening right now. And they were taken out of power because they were being resistance. They were not listening to the so-called powers that be. And today, we see in front of us the empires that have destroyed us over the past 60, 70, 80 years are now crumbling right in front of our eyes. But if we take into account African kingdoms, they ruled for thousands of years. And I know for sure that with a new crop of Africans, I'm not talking about the brothers and sisters in the continent. Now, I'm so happy to say that, that African personality is worldwide. I'll tell you something. I was on a mission with my group, my band, some years ago, and we went to Guyana. We toured Guyana for the emancipation. We were invited by the Guyanese government, so we're putting up cultural shows and musical stuff like that. We went to a place called Fort, I think, if my memory serves me right, Port Elizabeth or something like that. They were waiting for us, a big stadium. We started playing. We didn't know the program. We went there late, but we started performing and everybody was happy, dancing and stuff like that. And during the break, there was an African fashion show. So, all right, that's beautiful. That's really nice. Now, we had a workshop. We were playing the African drums and all those kind of stuff. And out came 3 people. An older lady and 2 young men. They came and joined us. And all of a sudden, the older woman, the woman, started speaking in tongues. She was possessed. My African brothers, I hear something to that effect. The more we played, the more she started, shaking. And I said to myself, yes, Mother Africa is everywhere. We believe in what Mother Africa taught us traditionally, our customs, our traditions. We take it everywhere. But then to go back to what you said about your grandmother, how your grandmother was able to, she may have learned it from her parents. The African tradition is like that. There got to be a time where we have to use the traditional way of resolving conflicts into our political governance, the structures right now. But it seems as if everybody's that's that old time stuff and stuff like that. But no, they are relevant today. We've got to protect our resources. It's the resources that is bringing all these skirmishes. It's the resources. I saw a cartoon before we came on air today. The cartoon there was a wall, and there's a date palm tree. And the date palm tree is grown on top of, past the wall, and it's bent to the other side of the wall. The other side, where the root is where Africa is. The Africans are watering the plant or the tree. On the other side, the fruits, the Europeans are picking them up.
That's quite a picture,
I'll send it to you. And this is what it is. It is the resources. We need to protect the resources. I'll say one more thing. When I was growing up in Ghana, for instance, there were certain no-go areas on certain days. They said, on these days, you cannot go to the farm to farm. You can't go there, you can't do this. Because if you go there, the ancestors are going to do that, blah, 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 blah. Mm-hmm. And people respected that.
Yeah.
You know the reason why? The reason why they did that was that they wanted to conserve the environment. If you go in that bush, you are going to see some tiger, you're going to see some god, you're going to see something there. So on certain days, you should not go into the bush. Mm-hmm. So the whole community followed that. And they were able to sustain that regimen.
You're right.
And today,
I like that. Yeah.
Yes. And today, it was tradition. Even though they used to tell us, those South Africans listening, says, you don't sweep, take the broom and sweep after nightfall, after 6 p.m. Don't sweep. If you sweep, your mother is going to die. Your father is going to die. You know the reason why? The reason why they said, don't do that. Nobody wants their mothers or their fathers to die, especially your mother to die. The reason why they brought up that was that Back in the day, they kept their gold, their diamonds in the house. And there was the fear that if you do that in the night and you sweep, you're going to throw out the gold. So we've got to go back into our tradition and see how the tradition has guarded and guided us up until now. Respect for elders, respect, people's opinions and ideas.
That's
You
right.
may agree to disagree. The only time that the people, I will never use the word tribe. The people, the clans, the only time they fought was expansion. And in the end, what happened? They lived as Africans.
Yeah.
Agree to disagree. So to the generals, if they are listening, you haven't tried at all. You didn't do the Sudanese people. You have not protected the resources of the Sudanese people. Human resources, the natural resources, the environment and everything. You haven't.
Yeah.
So how can the Sudanese people entrust or trust you to govern them? And after all is said and done, one of them is going to be victorious anyway. Or there could be a stalemate. Let's say one of them becomes the president. You've already destroyed the country, so you don't necessarily have to be there. Or you don't have to be to go out there and sit in the presidential palace and appoint people. You failed.
Yeah.
You have failed the people of Sudan. It shouldn't have come this far. But people are dead. And you have to be held accountable for what you've done. And even South Sudan, the southern part of Sudan, which had their own problems, even decided, President Kiir said they would negotiate. They will bring the two of them together to talk. They said, okay, I'll ceasefire less than 24 hours. Let's go for it. So they are not ready to listen until something huge comes to hit them. Because sending envoys to Saudi Arabia could have been done way before that, no matter what it is.
Yeah.
Africans will have to solve or resolve African problems.
You're absolutely right, my brother. Absolutely right. And I agree with you totally. We need to focus on ourselves and put our house together. Oh, by the way, you're still listening to Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio. And we have been talking about Africa being in charge of its own resources and saying that how do we manage our own resources? Because we should manage. We don't need permission from anybody to manage. Unfortunately, when we're not managing, then somebody will see the gaps and they will come and want to take advantage of that. It's really, really sad when some of our African countries end up with all their resources being taken by foreign bodies and foreign companies simply because we're not able to manage ourselves. And so we need to change that. So again, I know that we are nearing the end of our time here, but if you have any questions, any comments, please feel free to send them. And we would be more than happy to reflect on that and have others comment as well. So if there's anything else that has come in, please feel free to share that, Brother Theo.
Yes, we have a comment from Abuja, Nigeria, from Temi Adebayo. It's a great program. I'm enjoying it from Nigeria.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is good to know. Thank you so much, Tammy. It's good to have you on the team. We are here to talk about issues that concern us as Africans so that we can share ideas, like we said earlier. knowledge, information is empowerment. It's empowering. When we share information, we're empowering one another as well. So, um, your point about the two generals and saying that we hope they do listen to the radio and that they do listen to what is happening around, because, you know, Brother Theo, when you become the only voice you listen to, you become very dangerous.
That's true.
You know,
Echo
and
chamber.
that's right. And you shouldn't become the only voice you listen to. Um, our two generals, and I mean that with respect. Our two generals, yeah, you might have been established in your country. You know one thing that the other may not know. But how about having the people's interest at heart and saying, what is this doing to our nation? How can we come together? You know, put our guns down and say, listen, you upset me when you did this. You annoyed me when you did this. And you did the same when you did this. And have the elders talk to you and say, okay, boys, we heard you. We heard you. Okay. So now let's move forward. Let's move forward. Because, I mean, when you think of over 2.7 million people displaced, that's a lot of people. And not only that, millions and millions of people have died and they continue to die. One of the sad things, my brother Theo, is these generals, they incite a lot of courage and emotions in people, and people start killing themselves, and they are not killing each other, those two generals. You know, they are alive, but they are inciting people to do stuff, you know. So we need to be self-analytical. We need to look at our own situation and say, how can we make things better? How can we make things better? What is the way forward? I liked the other comment you made earlier when you said that, you know, some of our African leaders, I think you were referring to uh, Professor PLO, who is one of the smartest cookies we have in
Oh,
Africa. And I was like, you know, I, I think we need voices like those. Someone was saying, wouldn't it be wonderful to have him as a president of one of the countries? It would be wonderful, but I think if we did that, we would be limiting his influence on the rest of Africa. So I think we need him as you
where
know,
he is.
as a whistleblower, you know.
Yeah.
But to your point, some of our African leaders, they allow themselves to be ridiculed by foreigners. You know, he talks about, you know, they get these you know, gun salutes and all these, you know, all this noise being made about them and being flown here and taken this in a motorcade. But you're selling your own countries.
Mhm.
What do you benefit in the end? So Brother Theo, what comes to mind in terms of where to from here as we look at our own resources? What is happening? You know, you think of Canada, for example, in northern Ontario, where there's a lot of mining, like you know, cities like
Yeah.
Timmins, and there's a lot of mining.
Mhm.
But they're saying, listen, whatever you mine here, we want you to mine within these parameters, and we want this to benefit our people and our cities. And I'm like, that's what we should be doing in Africa. But the sad thing, my brother, is we have people who know mining in Canada who go and now they own mines in Africa. And I'm saying, how come some of our African leaders are not waking up to say, let's put restrictions here? Let's make sure that whatever we're mining in our area, in our region, is benefiting and developing our own people, hospitals and schools and all this. I mean, you hear in some of our African countries, people go to the hospital, there's no mat to lie on, there are no beds, there are no medicines in there. My brother, what's happening to our resources? Closing comments.
There, I think it's a situation where I think we need a new breed of African leaders, and we are starting and beginning to see that. Um, if you go to Ghana, for instance, the government has been fighting local miners The Chinese government is there, or I won't say the Chinese government. The Chinese are there, destroying rivers with the kind of mining regimen that they have. And I'm so surprised, and I won't be surprised if say you get a Canadian or an American or a Chinese or what have you, companies going there not respecting the guidelines that they use in mining in their countries. But when they go out there, yes, sure, pay their bribes or through, and then they do what they do. My whole thing is that my closing comment will be that we've got the resources, both human and natural. And over the past couple of years, we've seen some changes. I will not this I will always speak about the I don't like military coups. If we take Guinea, they were able to say, no, you have to mine this way. You have to establish refineries here. Don't take it outside and bring it out. They complied with it. If you go to Mali, Niger, Chad, Central African Republic, there's so many countries out there that the new breed of leaders are doing what is expected of them for the benefit of their countries. The old guards are leaving. They've done their part. They should move away and then, give the younger ones, those who know, I would call them the TikTok generation, and the social media generation, I would say. Now the internet is there. If you pick up your cell phone, the whole world is in your hands. We should be able to look at what other countries are doing that has benefited them. Not that we don't know, we know. But then corruption, nepotism, avarice, me, myself, and I, myself, and my friends, and we whether they qualify for certain ministerial positions or whatever, I have to put them there and stuff like that. That has got to stop. Appoint the right people to the right positions. Enforce rules. Not that we don't have rules. The rules are there. Let's go get the constitution. If there's the constitution, we have constitutions. We have to abide by them.
Right.
The person, the prime minister, the president does something, arrest the person, prosecute. How many times do we see African presidents or prime ministers or people in power flout rules and regulations and corrupt practices, and then all of a sudden you see them, they are running for public office again? That has got to stop. And if we feel that by coming out to demonstrate it's going to cause, we got to continue to do that. And that will bring a sense of, I don't know the right word to use. That will teach the powers that be within our countries that, you know what, if they are saying something is wrong, it may mean something is really wrong. We have to address those problems. And if you want to stay in power for, say, 200 years, that's good, because if the people are happy with the system, they'll support you. But in most African countries, some now they are all dying out. In some African countries, the president wants to be the president for life, and after that they appoint their children and stuff like that. That has got to stop. If you come 4 years, you're gone. 6 years, you're gone, because wisdom is not in one person's mind or brains, or doesn't reside in one person. Everybody has got to be able to express themselves. So when it comes to protecting our resources, African resources have got to be protected. Whether we like it or not, it's got to. We have to say, we don't have to tiptoe around situation. We have to call truth to power. That has been our problem. So if you are listening to us, if you are viewing us today, you know what? Contribute. Say your peace of mind, because we've been quiet for far too long. Because we have misplaced values. And it's got to change. The new Africa is what we are looking for.
That's right.
We want everybody to be a part of it. for the betterment of our future and the future generations. And I'll say, long live Africa.
Well said, my brother. Well said. Well, you have been listening to Love Bay Afrobeat Music Talk Radio Show. You've been watching and listening to us here today talking about, as our brother has rightfully ended, saying that African resources must be controlled and managed by Africans. We don't need permission from anybody. We should be able to manage our own resources. But unfortunately, if we are not managing, somebody else will see the gap and they will come and they will usurp power and they will take over from us. And then we are the ones who end up crying foul when we should be able to put our house together. So again, this comes to the point where we say goodbye for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us today in this global village, wherever you might be. We thank those of you who took time to send us comments and to write and ask questions. We really appreciate that. And next week, until next time, thank you so much for listening and for watching. And we look forward to seeing you next week. And this has been a lovely, lovely presentation indeed. So thank you, Brother Theo, being right there and making sure that things are being done right in the back seat there. And this has been your host, Dr. FM, signing off. Till next time.